"Get out!" reverberated through the cramped Queen's apartment, her voice cracking with terror. But Roman didn't flinch. He just stood there, barricading the door, his dark eyes locked on Paige's trembling, soft curves. He hadn't come to kill her. He had come to claim the woman he obsessively watched. Paige Hayes had spent her 28 years mastering the art of being invisible. At 240 pounds, society had taught her that taking up physical space meant she should shrink her personality to compensate. She wore oversized muted cardigans, kept her head down during her commute on the N train, and worked quietly as an accountant at a mid-level logistics firm on 34th Street. Her apartment in Astoria was her only true sanctuary, a tiny rent-controlled haven smelling perpetually of vanilla extract and old paperbacks. It was the only place where she allowed herself to just exist free from the judgmental glances and unsolicited dietary advice of the outside world. It was a Tuesday night, the kind where the rain lashed violently against the single-pane windows, threatening to crack the glass. Paige was in her kitchen, wearing a faded, oversized t-shirt and loose grey sweatpants that clung to her wide hips and thick thighs. She was aggressively kneading dough for a batch of focaccia, finding solace in the rhythmic physical labor. The hum of her ancient refrigerator masked the subtle metallic click of her front door's deadbolt turning. By the time she heard the heavy, deliberate footsteps on the scuffed hardwood of her narrow hallway, it was too late to run. Paige froze her hands coated in flour, her heart plummeting into her stomach. She turned slowly, instinctively reaching for the heavy wooden rolling pin on the counter. Standing in the archway of her kitchen was a man who looked entirely out of place in her modest life. He was tall, easily 6'3", with shoulders broad enough to block the hallway light. He wore a bespoke charcoal grey suit that screamed quiet, lethal wealth, a stark contrast to his rugged, brutally handsome face. His jaw was lined with dark stubble, and his piercing storm-grey eyes were locked directly onto her. Paige knew exactly who he was. Anyone who paid attention to the whispers in New York knew the face of Roman Caldwell. He was the undisputed head of the Caldwell Syndicate, a man whose name was synonymous with racketeering extortion and bodies pulled from the East River. "Get out!" she screamed, the rolling pin trembling in her grip. Her voice was raw, a mix of sheer terror and adrenaline. "I swear to God, I'll scream. I'll call the police." Roman didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply reached backward, wrapping a large gloved hand around the brass doorknob of her front door, and firmly clicked the lock into place. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small room. "You can scream, Paige," Roman said, his voice, a low, gravelly baritone that sent a confusing shiver down her spine. But Mrs. Gable in 4B is deaf in her left ear, and the couple in 4D went to Florida for the week. The police wouldn't make it here in time anyway. Put the rolling pin down before you hurt your wrist. Her breath hitched. He knew her name. He knew her neighbors. "What do you want?" she demanded, refusing to lower her makeshift weapon, though her arms were burning with the strain. "I don't have money. I don't know anyone in your world. You have the wrong apartment." Roman took a slow, deliberate step forward, crossing the threshold into the cramped kitchen. Paige backed up until her lower back hit the edge of the laminate counter. She felt entirely exposed. The oversized shirt did nothing to hide the heavy curve of her breasts or the soft, plush roll of her stomach. She expected him to look at her with the same disguised disgust or dismissal she received from most men. Instead, Roman's gaze was consuming. It dragged over her messy bun, down the frantic pulse at her thick neck, tracing the generous curves of her body with an intensity that felt almost reverent. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hunger. "I have exactly the right apartment," Roman murmured, stopping just a few feet away. The scent of rain, expensive leather, and dark cedar rolled off him, overwhelming the smell of her baking. "I've been watching this apartment for 3 months. I know you leave for work at exactly 7:40. I know you buy your cinnamon from the bodega on 31st Avenue because you like the owner's cat. I know you cry when you read historical fiction on the subway." Paige felt the blood drain from her face. "You're insane. You've been stalking me. Observing." Roman corrected smoothly his eyes, flashing with a possessive heat. "Protecting. You think you're invisible, Paige. You walk through this city trying to hide yourself. But I saw you. The moment I saw you outside that bakery in November, bundled in that terrible yellow scarf, I saw everything. This doesn't make any sense," she cried out, tears of frustration and fear pricking her eyes. She was a fat, socially awkward accountant. Men like Roman Caldwell, billionaire crime lords who dated supermodels and socialites, did not obsess over women who wore a size 20. "Why are you here? Please just leave me alone." "I can't do that," Roman said, the calmness in his voice entirely at odds with the terrifying nature of his words. He closed the remaining distance between them. Paige squeezed her eyes shut and swung the rolling pin in a blind panic. Roman caught her wrist mid-air with effortless grace. His grip was an iron vice, yet surprisingly gentle, ensuring he didn't bruise her skin. He plucked the wooden pin from her fingers and tossed it onto the floor, where it clattered harmlessly away. "Open your eyes, Paige," he commanded softly. She did, gasping as she found his face mere inches from hers. He was so close she could see the tiny flecks of silver in his grey eyes. "I'm here because your idiot boss, Gregory Henderson, has been laundering money for Dino Webb." Roman explained, his thumb lifting to brush a stray smudge of flour from her soft cheek. Paige shivered at the contact. "My men raided Henderson's accounts today. Webb knows the firm is compromised. He is sending a cleanup crew tonight to silence everyone who had access to those ledgers. That includes you." Paige's mind spun. Gregory money laundering. It sounded absurd, like a plot from a late-night movie, but Roman's deadly serious expression grounded her in reality. "No," she stammered, shaking her head. "No, I just do the payroll. I don't know anything about laundering. Webb doesn't care," Roman stated flatly. "To him, you're a loose end. To me, you are the only thing in this city that matters. And I am not going to let a filthy Irish street thug touch a single perfect inch of you." Before Paige could process the shocking declaration, a sharp metallic ping echoed from the living room, followed by the terrifying sound of shattering glass. "Down!" Roman roared. In a fraction of a second, his massive hands gripped her thick waist bodily, dragging her to the linoleum floor, just as a volley of suppressed gunfire tore through the apartment. The bullets shredded her beige sofa and obliterated the small television, showering the dark living room in sparks and debris. Paige screamed, clamping her hands over her ears as the deafening noise assaulted her. She felt Roman's heavy, muscular body cover hers completely, pressing her flush against the cold floor. He was a human shield, taking the brunt of the falling drywall and shattered glass. Despite her size, he made her feel impossibly small, entirely enveloped in his protective mass. "Stay down," he barked, pulling a heavy matte black Glock from a shoulder holster hidden beneath his suit jacket. He rolled off her, using the kitchen island for cover. Footsteps crunched on the broken glass outside the window. Someone was on the fire escape. Roman didn't hesitate. He leaned out from cover and fired 3 rapid, deafening shots toward the window. A heavy thud and a gargled scream told Paige he hadn't missed. "Get up!" Roman ordered, grabbing her arm and hauling her to her feet with shocking ease. "We're leaving. Now. My purse. My keys." Paige stammered, her chest heaving, as she struggled to catch her breath. Panic was clawing at her throat, suffocating her. "Leave them!" Roman snapped. "You won't need them where we're going." He dragged her toward the front door, pulling her out into the dimly lit hallway of her building. The sounds of doors unlocking echoed as neighbors startled by the noise began to peek out. Roman paid them no mind, ushering Paige rapidly toward the stairwell. They descended 3 flights of stairs in record time. Paige's lungs burned, her heavy thighs aching with the sudden intense exertion. She tripped on the final landing, her ankle giving out. But before she could hit the concrete, Roman caught her. Without a word of complaint or a sigh of annoyance, reactions she was intimately used to, whenever her weight inconvenienced someone, he scooped her up into his arms. "I'm too heavy," she gasped, instinctively trying to push away. "Put me down, I can walk." "Quiet, Paige." Roman grunted, his grip tightening securely under her knees and around her broad back. "You are exactly as you should be." He kicked open the heavy metal door leading to the alleyway. The freezing rain instantly soaked them. Waiting in the shadows was a sleek, armored black SUV, its engine purring quietly. A man in a tailored black suit, Leo Thompson, Roman's ruthless enforcer, and right-hand man, threw open the rear door. Roman practically tossed her onto the plush leather seats before climbing in after her. "Drive, Leo. Take us to the penthouse," Roman commanded. The SUV tore out of the alley tires, squealing against the wet asphalt as they sped away from the only life Paige had ever known. Inside the vehicle, the silence was thick and suffocating. Paige sat shivering, her wet, oversized t-shirt, clinging uncomfortably to her rolls, her bare feet tucked beneath her. She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to make herself as small as possible. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a cold, hollow dread. She had survived an assassination attempt only to be kidnapped by the city's most feared Mafia boss. Roman reached into a hidden compartment between the seats, pulling out a thick, heated cashmere blanket. He draped it over her trembling shoulders, his hands lingering briefly on her wet hair. "You're safe now," he said quietly, his tone softening to a dangerous velvet purr. "Webb's men won't find you. You're officially off the grid." "I want to go home," she whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her plump cheek. "You don't have a home anymore, Paige," Roman said, the brutal honesty cutting through the air. "Your apartment is compromised. Gregory Henderson is already dead. You can't go back to the firm, and you can't go back to Queens." She looked at him, her chest tight. "Then what happens to me?" Roman's eyes darkened, dropping briefly to her lips before meeting her terrified gaze. "You stay with me, in my home, where I can see you, where I can touch you, and where no one will ever hurt you again." "I'm a prisoner," she breathed out, the realization dawning on her. "You're an obsession," Roman corrected, leaning closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. "I have spent months watching you live a life that doesn't appreciate you, watching men look past you, watching you try to shrink yourself for a world that doesn't deserve you. That ends tonight. In my world, you take up all the space you want." 20 minutes later, the SUV descended into a heavily fortified underground parking garage beneath a gleaming high-rise in Manhattan's exclusive Gold Coast district. Leo parked the car and remained perfectly silent, staring straight ahead as Roman escorted Paige out. They took a private elevator that shot up to the 60th floor, the doors opening directly into a penthouse that defied belief. It was a sprawling masterpiece of dark marble floor-to-ceiling glass windows, offering a panoramic view of the storm-swept city and modern plush furnishings. It was cold, pristine, and terrifyingly expensive. It was a gilded cage. Roman led her into a massive master bedroom, gesturing to a luxurious king-sized bed draped in dark silks. There is a hot shower through that door. Fresh clothes in the closet, they've been tailored to your exact measurements. Paige whipped her head around to stare at him. You bought clothes for me before tonight. I told you, Paige, Roman said, unbuttoning his ruined suit jacket and tossing it onto a chair. I didn't come to your apartment to rescue you. I used the web hit as an excuse to finally take what I wanted. I was never going to let you stay in that pathetic life. He walked toward her, and instinct made her back away until she bumped into the edge of the bed. Roman followed, boxing her in by placing his large hands on the mattress on either side of her hips. He leaned down his face inches from hers, his gaze tracing the soft, frightened curve of her mouth. You're going to hate me for a while, Roman whispered, his thumb gently stroking the soft flesh of her jawline. You'll call me a monster. You'll scream at me to let you go. But you will stay. And eventually you'll realize that here you are, a queen. My queen. Paige's breath caught in her throat. The sheer weight of his conviction terrified her more than the bullets had. She was a hostage to a madman's infatuation, trapped in a world of violence and blood, with a man who looked at her heavy, flawed body not as a burden, but as his ultimate prize. I won't let you do this, she whispered, though her voice lacked any real venom. Roman smiled a dark, devastating smirk that promised chaos. You already have, darling. Welcome home. Days melted into an agonizingly slow blur of silk gourmet meals and relentless psychological warfare. Paige Hayes remained barricaded within the sprawling master suite of the penthouse, wrapped in a plush robe that swallowed her soft curves. Roman Caldwell had kept his terrifying promise. The closet was filled with magnificent garments, tailored exclusively for a woman of her heavy proportions. Cashmere sweaters, custom-fitted designer jeans, and silk lingerie that hugged every roll and dip of her flesh without pinching. It was a stark contrast to the cheap plus-size department store racks she was accustomed to navigating. Roman did not lock her in the room, but the imposing presence of his enforcer, Leo Thompson, standing stoically in the main hallway, served as a silent reminder of her captivity. Yet the most confusing aspect of her imprisonment was Roman himself. He was a ruthless crime lord, a man who commanded an empire of illicit trade and violence, but when he crossed the threshold of her bedroom, he transformed. He never forced himself on her. Instead, he engaged in a deliberate, intoxicating campaign to dismantle a lifetime of deep-seated insecurities. Every evening, Roman would enter, carrying a tray of decadent food, truffle risotto braised short ribs, thick slices of chocolate ganache cake. He would sit beside her on the edge of the mattress, watching her eat with a dark, predatory satisfaction. You barely touched your dinner, Roman murmured one stormy Thursday evening, eyeing the half-eaten plate on the bedside table. He reached out his large, calloused fingers, gently tracing the heavy line of her jaw. Paige flinched, pulling her thick knees to her chest. I'm not hungry. I feel sick, Roman. You can't just keep me here. I miss my life. You miss being invisible, Roman corrected softly, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated in her chest. You miss a world that made you feel ashamed for existing. I will never apologize for taking you from that. You kidnapped me, she cried out, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. You don't care about me. You're just obsessed with possessing something you think you own. Roman's expression hardened, a flash of dangerous lightning in his storm-grey eyes. He stood up abruptly, stripping off his suit jacket and unbuttoning his collar. He stepped closer, crowding her space until she was forced to lean back against the headboard. He leaned over her, planting his arms on either side of her hips. If I merely wanted to possess you, Paige, you would be locked in a vault, Roman growled, his face mere inches from hers. "But I want you to rule. I want you to see what I see. Look at yourself." He grabbed a heavy silver hand mirror from the vanity and forced it into her trembling hands, guiding it so she had to look at her reflection. She saw her tear-streaked face, her double chin, the wide expanse of her shoulders, and the soft, heavy swell of her breasts spilling over the robe. "I see a woman who was taught to hate her own softness," Roman whispered fiercely, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. He trailed a heated kiss down the side of her thick neck, making her breath hitch. "Every curve, every inch of flesh. It is exquisite. You are a goddess carved from marble and velvet. I don't just want to own you, Paige. I want to worship you." For the first time in her 28 years, Paige felt a terrifying spark of desire ignite within her belly. She had been starved of affection, conditioned to believe she was unworthy of a man's genuine, unbridled lust. Roman's dark obsession was overwhelming, but it was also the most intoxicating validation she had ever experienced. However, the fragile bubble of their strange domesticity was about to violently burst. Late the next night, Paige crept out of the bedroom, desperate for a glass of water from the main kitchen. The penthouse was shrouded in darkness, save for the dim glow of the city skyline pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. As she padded softly across the hardwood floor, hushed voices caught her attention. Roman and Leo were standing in the cavernous home office, the door left slightly ajar. "Dino Webb is making a move," Leo stated, his voice tight with urgency. "Our scouts just confirmed that 3 heavily armed convoys are mobilizing from his Staten Island warehouse. They know you're here, boss. They found out about the girl." Paige froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Roman slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk, the sound echoing sharply. How did that Irish bastard track my personal residence?" "There's a leak," Leo replied grimly. "Someone high up in our logistics chain sold the security codes to the penthouse elevator bypass. Webb isn't just coming for a turf war, Roman. He's coming to execute you and take the accountant to finish the job he started in Queens." "Double the perimeter guard," Roman ordered, his tone lethal. "Arm the EMP charges in the lower lobby. If Webb wants to step into my house, I will make sure he never leaves it." Paige backed away, her hands shaking as she clutched the fabric of her robe. The danger she thought she had escaped had followed her. She was the catalyst for a mob war. If she stayed, Roman might die defending her. If she ran, Webb would hunt her down. She retreated to the kitchen, her analytical accountant's brain kicking into overdrive. Logistics, numbers, systems. These were the things she understood. She grabbed a sleek tablet Roman had left on the counter, one connected to the penthouse's master smart system, and began rapidly searching the building's architectural blueprints and security subroutines. If Webb had the elevator bypass codes, they would come up through the freight shafts. Suddenly, the power in the penthouse completely cut out. The hum of the refrigerator died. The soft, ambient lights vanished. The only illumination came from the lightning flashing outside over the Manhattan skyline. They were here. A deafening explosion rocked the building, sending violent tremors through the floorboards. Paige screamed, dropping the tablet, as the massive double doors of the penthouse's private elevator were blown entirely off their hinges. Smoke and the acrid smell of sulfur flooded the grand foyer. "Paige, get down!" Roman roared from the hallway. He emerged from the shadows, an assault rifle gripped tightly in his hands. Leo was right behind him, laying down a barrage of suppressive fire into the smoke-filled foyer. Tactical mercenaries clad in black tactical gear poured into the living room, their weapons flashing as they fired blindly into the darkness. Roman sprinted across the open space, dodging a spray of bullets that shredded the expensive modern art on the walls. He tackled Paige to the marble floor, shielding her heavy frame with his own, just as the kitchen island behind them was reduced to splinters by incoming fire. "I told you to stay in the room!" Roman shouted over the deafening noise, his eyes frantically scanning the room for an exit. "They used the freight elevators!" Paige yelled back, coughing as the smoke thickened. "The security codes, I saw it on the tablet. They bypassed the lower lobbies entirely." Before Roman could process her words, a chilling, heavily accented voice echoed through the ruined penthouse. "Cease fire." The gunfire halted, leaving only the sound of ringing ears and groaning structural damage. Emerging from the dissipating smoke was Dino Webb. He was a wiry, scarred man with cold, dead eyes and a wicked smile flanked by 6 heavily armed men. "Well now, Caldwell," Dino mocked, stepping over the shattered glass. "Look at the absolute state of you. All this money, all this power, and you're hiding behind a kitchen counter over a fat little ledger keeper. It's pathetic." Roman's grip on his rifle tightened his jaw, clenching so hard it looked ready to snap. "You stepped into the wrong house, Dino." "Did I?" Dino laughed, gesturing to his men who raised their weapons, training the laser sights directly on the space where Roman and Paige were pinned. "You're outgunned, Roman. Hand over the girl. She knows too much about the Henderson accounts. Give her up, and maybe I'll let you keep your territory south of 14th Street. Paige felt Roman shift slightly, his muscles bunching with coiled violence. He looked down at her, his storm-grey eyes softening for a fraction of a second. He pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to her forehead. "I told you," Roman whispered, his voice steady and resolute. "You are my queen, and kings do not surrender their queens to pawns." He pushed himself up, preparing to step out into the open to draw their fire. But Paige grabbed his arm, her fingers digging desperately into his tailored shirt. "Wait!" She breathed, her eyes darting to the tablet she had dropped on the floor just a few feet away. It was still glowing faintly. The smart home system. The emergency fire suppression. It operates on a localized halon gas sub-network. If I trigger it in the foyer, it will blind them and suck the oxygen from their zone. Roman stared at her, a fierce, primal pride illuminating his features. "Can you reach it?" "Cover me," Paige said. It was the bravest thing she had ever said in her life. She was no longer the shrinking, invisible woman from Astoria. She was fighting for her life, and heaven help her, she was fighting for the terrifying Mafia boss who loved her just the way she was. "Leo, on my mark," Roman barked into his comm piece. "Mark," Roman yelled, rising from cover and unleashing a relentless hail of gunfire toward Dino's men. Leo did the same from his flank, forcing the attackers to dive for cover behind the ruined sofas. Paige threw herself forward. Her heavy body hit the floor hard, bruising her ribs, but she scrambled desperately across the cold marble, her fingers snatching the glowing tablet. She rapidly tapped the screen, her thumbs flying across the interface she had memorized minutes prior. System override. Fire suppression foyer and living area. Activate. A loud mechanical hiss erupted from the ceiling. Instantly, thick, blinding white halon gas deployed in a massive cloud directly over Dino and his men. "I can't see," one of the mercenaries screamed, coughing violently as the oxygen was rapidly displaced. Panic set in among the attackers as they fired wildly into the thick fog. "Move," Roman commanded. Using the confusion, Roman and Leo advanced with lethal precision. They moved through the periphery of the gas cloud like shadows. Paige covered her ears and buried her face in her arms as a series of sharp, decisive gunshots rang out. There were no screams, only the heavy thuds of bodies hitting the floor. Within 90 seconds, the penthouse fell completely silent. The smoke and gas slowly began to clear, sucked away by the emergency ventilation system. Paige cautiously lifted her head. The magnificent apartment was a ruined war zone of shredded furniture, bullet holes, and fallen enemies. Roman stood over the motionless form of Dino Webb, lowering his weapon. He turned, dropping the rifle, and walked slowly toward Paige. He was covered in drywall dust and soot, a dark crimson stain blooming across the shoulder of his shirt where a stray bullet had grazed him. He didn't care about his injury. He dropped to his knees in front of her, pulling her heavy, trembling body into his chest. Paige wrapped her thick arms tightly around his neck, burying her face into his shoulder, breathing in the scent of cedar gunpowder and survival. "You did perfectly," Roman whispered fiercely, burying his hands into her messy hair. "You saved us, Paige. You are magnificent." She pulled back slightly, looking into the eyes of the monster who had kidnapped her, the man who had terrified her, and the man who had just risked his entire empire to keep her breathing. The fear was gone, replaced by a dark, consuming reality. She could never go back to her small, invisible life in Queens. She didn't want to. Here, amidst the wreckage and the violence, she was finally seen. She was cherished. She was entirely unapologetic about the space she occupied. "Are you hurt?" Paige asked softly, her fingers brushing the torn fabric over his bleeding shoulder. "I am exactly where I want to be," Roman replied, capturing her lips in a bruising, desperate kiss that tasted of smoke and absolute devotion. The Caldwell Syndicate had survived the night, but the underworld would never be the same. The ruthless king of New York had found his queen, and heaven help anyone who dared to look past her again. Thank you so much for reading this thrilling Mafia romance. If Paige and Roman's intense, high-stakes love story kept you on the edge of your seat, please like this video, share it with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more explosive, heart-pounding audio stories. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a wild twist. Leave a comment below, letting us know your favorite moment from the Penthouse Showdown.